8:15 is the time. It was an historic moment that LGBT veterans had waited decades for. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, apologised to those who had been sacked or forced out of the military simply for being gay.
That's because it was illegal to be homosexual in the British military until the year 2000. Well, a report into their treatment, which recommends that affected veterans are financially compensated, is now being considered by the government. Our LGBT and identity correspondent, Lauren Moss, reports.
The ban on LGBT people serving in our military until the year 2000 was an appalling failure of the British state.
It's an apology they've waited decades for.
Many endured the most horrific sexual abuse and violence, homophobic bullying and harassment, all while bravely serving this country. Today, on behalf of the British state, I apologise.
An apology that means everything to those whose hopes and dreams were taken away because it was illegal to be who they are. But what's been called a watershed moment for LGBT veterans is just the latest in a battle for equality that's lasted more than 20 years. The decriminalisation of homosexuality in Britain began in 1967, but it wasn't until 33 years later, the year 2000, that the ban on gay people serving in the military was lifted, when these four veterans took their fight to the European Court of Human Rights. More than 20 years later, the government launched the LGBT Veterans Independent review into the impact of the ban. Yesterday, the Prime Minister apologised. The ban resulted in some people being investigated, imprisoned and left without a pension. It's thought up to 5,000 people may have been affected, including Ken Wright, a rising star in the RAF when he revealed he was gay.
I was on track for a promotion. I'd just been awarded a personal commendation from the Commander-in-Chief. And I met my now husband, Colin. We've been together 35 years. And I thought I'd tell the truth. So I admitted, thinking that would be the easy way.
A report has made more than 60 recommendations and suggestions, including financial compensation.
Okay, everybody out to me, please.
The Prime Minister says the veterans should be proud of everything they've done to keep our country safe. Lauren Moss, BBC News.
Well, we're joined now by two LGBT veterans, Emma Riley, who was in the Royal Navy for 3 years, and also double Olympic champion Dame Kelly Holmes, who also served in the Army. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Emma, let us start with you. This is a really big moment, isn't it? And that apology is really significant. Tell us a little of your story.
The short version is I joined the Royal Navy at 18 in 1990. That was my vocation. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to serve my country and I wanted to belong in the way that you can only belong in the military sense. I didn't know really at that point that I was gay, and I knew when I signed the contract that that was illegal. But fast forward 3.5 years and I'd become a bit more sure about what I was. And there was a lot of stress going on at that time. My father was gravely ill, and I had become, because I was more sure, more hiding of my personality, and I was under that stress of not trying to let anybody know what I thought I might be. Anyway, I went out with somebody I thought was my friend, told that person I thought I might be gay, and pretty much the next morning it was get up, get downstairs, get dressed, you're under arrest. And I was interviewed, searched, sent home in a way to force myself. I had to be forced out to my parents. They sent me home to tell my parents. And then about a few weeks later, they threw me out, and that was the end of it.
And that meant then that you had to restart career, life?
Everything.
Everything. Ambitions?
Everything was gone. I had to redraw my entire map of the world. And the one bright spot in all of this is that when I told my parents, they were supportive. I was lucky in that I wasn't medically examined, I wasn't psychologically examined, I didn't go through some of the really horrific things that some of the other veterans who were affected by this did, and I was lucky enough that my parents were supportive. Many people got thrown out and then immediately got thrown out by their families, so ended up homeless as well as jobless and familyless.
So the apology yesterday, what difference does it make? Does it make any of that easier? Does it make it okay?
It doesn't make it easier. It doesn't make it okay what they did. However, having an acknowledgement from that level, the state level, effectively, is a huge watershed moment for veterans like I. And much as it was a moment just before Prime Minister's question times, and it was a little bit sort of lost in some ways in the midst of all of that normal hullabaloo, the fact that we actually got an apology from the Prime Minister is a huge deal, because they've not particularly been good at apologising for anything else that's gone on in the past. So I think it was a huge watershed moment. It does mean a lot.
Dame Kelly Holmes. Kelly, good to have you with us this morning. I mean, the same question to you. What was your reaction when you realised this apology had been made?
Well, of course, I was at Whitehall yesterday with Emma, and then we got to go and listen to Ben Wallace. It was, as Emma said, it was a watershed moment. In some senses, quite historical and an emotional day for so many, because the Prime Minister's apology was actually one of the 49 recommendations that went into the LGBT Veterans Review. So realistically, that's a big tick and a big plus for all of the hard work that's gone into the review from so many people coming forward, like myself, Emma, and over 1,000 veterans who actually submitted evidence into the review.
You know, so many people might be actually watching just going, why are you interviewing Dame Kelly Holmes? Because she's like sporting brilliance. But obviously you had a career in the military as well, didn't you? And it was just last year, I think, when you said that you were gay. You know, you had your television programme as well. And so you're coming from this from all sides.
Yes, for sure. So a very short summary again of me was that I always wanted to go in the military since I was 14. I was desperate to go in. I wanted a career. I loved the thought of the camaraderie and everything it could give you. During when I was, just before I was 18, I didn't know I was gay. I got into a relationship in basic training, but I kept it very quiet, and so did everybody else that was involved. And I kept that quiet throughout my whole life. Because you had to. And I also then became an international athlete, of course, where it also wasn't possible to talk about being gay, because again, no one else did. But what happened with me, it caused me psychological and mental health issues, because being a young soldier, when I got raided at 23, which is, I must explain what a raid is, really. It's kind of like if you go home tonight and the perpetrators are still in your house and they're ransacking everything in front of you, they're vilifying you, they're emotionally degrading you to the point where you're so petrified. I had that when I was 23, like a lot of others did. And that installed absolute debilitating fear for me throughout my whole life. And it was only until I got to the point where I had to publicly come out for my own self worth and sanity that I got to do that last year. But it was because of the ban and what I felt about the ban. And I actually really irrationally thought I could be jailed if I admitted being gay, because some people were jailed, sexually abused, all of the horrific things that came out of the review. So, you know, this is a big day yesterday. And I must say, you know, Emma was actually in my documentary. And I must say that Emma, you know, what you have to realise is we had the apologies yesterday, and everybody, when Ben Wallace did his statement, and he did make it clear as a statement, not a debate, everybody in the House of Commons absolutely agreed that all of the 49 recommendations must be appointed. But Emma was one of the, you know, there was 4 that went to the Human Court, Human Rights, Human Court of Human Rights. Nearly got that. And Emma was the next 3. And without them pushing for the rights of soldiers, that ban would never have got lifted. So people like Emma, again, should be celebrated as well, far more than 23 years later when we get an apology now.
Kelly, this is a really personal question. It feels almost like you can breathe after this. Is that, and excuse me if that's the wrong observation, but it just feels like at last, from what I'm witnessing from seeing you, something's lifted. It may be tiny, it may not be enough, but something's lifted.
Yeah, I think yesterday was massive because, you know, when you hear the stories and you know veterans and we see them all the time, you know, it's ruined people's lives. And I think yesterday was the first point that so many people can start to rebuild.
And Emma, we know that this has been a very long process, and as Kelly was telling us there, a lot of campaigning has gone to get to this point. But in some respects also, it's just the first step, isn't it? Because I'm looking at the report, you brought it in, it's a big old report. It's looking at, you know, how this could be put right. Compensation, one of the issues we've touched on. Reinstating permission to wear military uniform. The return of medals. Those in each and of their own are really important. What would make the biggest difference? What is the priority there?
Talk to each veteran and ask them. For each veteran has a different story. My story is one type of story. Other people were forced out because they couldn't live under that ban, even though they weren't actually thrown out themselves. That's another type of story. Each person will have something that's more meaningful to them. Some will need the money, the compensation. Some will need much more help with housing or mental health support because they've been totally destroyed by what's happened to them, and so haven't been able to live the normal productive life that a veteran would have with support, as they usually have coming out of the military. Some will simply need to have seen the Prime Minister give that apology, and that's enough for them. Some need a veterans badge when they haven't had it before. Some need a veterans badge that is specific for LGBT veterans. Everybody has a different level and a different need, and that's exactly the point now. We've got to this point. It's 23 years since the ban was lifted. It's 30 years since they threw me out. And yet it's right at the beginning of the next steps, which is actually putting into practice the recommendations that are in this report. And to be fair to them, yesterday, both the Prime Minister and Ben Wallace did support all 49 recommendations in some way, shape or other. And that was echoed across the House from all parties. So that was a good thing to see.
Emma, it's really good to talk to you, and it's be very interesting to see where this goes now, in moving on. Emma Riley, LGBT veteran, thank you very much. Dame Kelly Holmes, thank you very much for your time with us, and I think you've both just explained just how important this is, despite it being so far on since that ban was lifted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.